Contrary to what Catholics have been told, the early church fathers and writers were not Catholic. Many of them stood against the idea of the Roman papacy and didn't believe that the Pope was the successor of Peter and the head of the church. Augustine wrote in Retractions chapter 20 that the church was going to be built upon Jesus, that Jesus was the rock.
So the problem with this approach is that we're cherry picking quotes from the early church fathers in the same way that people often cherry pick quotes from the scriptures themselves. And even worse than this, he's actually misrepresenting some of the examples he's citing here. And I'll get to that in a second. But first, let me quote some earlier church fathers that actually affirm the papacy and the primacy of Rome. For example, we have Pope Clement I writing to the Corinthians, and they had overthrown their entire hierarchy. So he's writing to them, telling them they need to reinstate their hierarchy, and he tells them, quote, "Accept our counsel, and you will have nothing to regret. If anyone disobey the things which have been said by him through us, him being God, let them know that they will involve themselves in transgression and in no small danger." So first of all, Pope Clement I is presuming a large amount of authority by interfering in a conflict in another church in the first place. But even more so, he says that God has spoken through him to the Corinthians, and if they disobey Pope Clement I, that they are inviting danger upon themselves, that they are committing a transgression and they are in danger. In other words, saying it's a sin to disobey him because God has spoken through him. And he mentions St. Irenaeus.
Irenaeus, in his book Against Heresies, traces the succession of bishops in Rome to Peter and Paul, not just Peter alone.
But he forgets to mention, very conveniently, that Irenaeus also said in that same passage, quote, "With that church," that's the Roman church, "because of its superior origin, all the churches must agree. That is, all the faithful in the whole world." It seems to me that the Bishop of Rome has some kind of prime authority over the church. And lastly, probably the most egregious misrepresentation in this whole video is his representation of Cyprian rejecting the authority of the Pope.
Cyprian of Carthage and another bishop opposed Pope Stephen I's claim over other bishops.
Now look, St. Cyprian of Carthage and Pope Stephen had their conflicts, but ultimately he very much did affirm the papacy. For example, when St. Cyprian wrote to Antonian, he says, quote, "You wrote that I should forward a copy of the same letter to our colleague, Pope Cornelius, so that laying aside all anxiety, he might at once know that you held communion with him, that is, with the Catholic Church." So Cyprian is equating union with the Pope, with the Bishop of Rome, to union with the Catholic Church as a whole. But anyways, I'm glad Protestants are reading the early church fathers. I think you should also check out what they have to say about the Eucharist, baptism, church hierarchy, the sacrifice of the Mass, the Blessed Virgin Mary. Please check it out. Check it out. It's going to be good.